Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to give you guys a guide on the item progression for your character in Diablo 4. And this guide is going to be very different than other guides that you've seen because I'm going to show you absolutely no gameplay. This is not going to be as detailed as you think, but I think having seen a lot of the guides on this topic, when you start to get into the numbers, you lose track of different things, and there's really only one important number when it comes to gearing. I'm going to talk about gearing your character from start to finish. There's many ways to level a character, but I think you should focus on actually enjoying the game. You should probably not have your first character power leveled through it. If you are going to play through Diablo 4, the best thing to do is to go through the world, do the main quest line, worry about the side quests and stuff. You can combine those with Hell Tides later. Have some fun, do some of the dungeons. But one really big part of gearing when you're leveling up has to do with planning a little bit for the long term. This might require you to do a little bit of research, but knowing at least the type of build that you want to pursue when you make a character, it's a pretty good idea to plan out at least lightly so you know what you're going to pursue. And you want to target certain aspects, legendary aspects, that you will use later on. What I like to do when I'm leveling is, if I see an event nearby, I do the event. And this simple task, if you fast forward 50 levels, you're going to have a lot of items that you can roll with the gambling guy in the game. And this is where you want to start planning things out. For example, when I was leveling my Necromancer, I did lots of events as I leveled. If I saw one when I walked by, I did the event. Simple as that. The experience is pretty good. At that level, there's not a whole lot of hyper-efficient things that you can do other than getting power leveled, which, again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend. For Necromancer, I wanted the +2 Skeleton Warriors, I wanted the +2 Skeleton Mages, and I wanted the Skeleton Mages cast Blizzard. And I wanted these three so I can have a functioning character at least the mid to high level parts of the game. So I looked it up, and all three of these are utility. Utility shows up on a number of gear pieces, but I looked up, and in my case, you want to target specific legendary aspects. You want to find a gear piece that doesn't have many others. In my case, it's boots. Boots have utility and mobility, and there's very few mobility legendary aspects, so I just gambled boots. It didn't really matter what kind of gear my character actually needed at the time. I just gambled boots so I could guarantee the legendary aspects that I needed for my character to work that I couldn't get from dungeons. And you need to be a little bit clever about this because the costs for gambling certain things are not always the same. If you're curious, something like a damage-based like an offensive legendary power that is not found in the codex, you might want to gamble like offhands because offhands only cost 40. You want to do this to stockpile a whole bunch of them. In my case, I had like almost 10 Skeleton Warriors, 5 Mages, and a couple Blizzards by the time I was level 50. That sounds pretty extreme, but again, I did a lot of events, and this let me not have a bit of a roadblock when it comes to legendary powers. So that's a pretty important part of the prep. Now you made your character, you're starting to do events, you're picking up gear off the ground. There's some pretty big basics here. So you want to keep your weapon rare. Do not make your weapon legendary until after level 50, and that's because you're going to be upgrading it a lot. The stats on your gear, other than like literally just vulnerable damage. Vulnerable damage will actually meaningfully increase your character's DPS, even if it has a roll of like 10. Other than vulnerable damage, none of those stats really matter that much. The stats are all kind of like percentage based, and they're also tiny until you get to the higher tiers post level 50, that up until then it really doesn't matter a single bit. Your goal is to play through the game. Honestly, you can almost use whatever has up green arrow. You always want to blacksmith upgrade your weapon to at least the first 2 tiers, and anytime you get a weapon with higher damage, ignoring every stat other than vulnerable damage, you might want to weigh that in a little bit, you just slap it on. You want to put the key legendary aspects that work, that make your character work, on the pieces that don't have much of an impact on your character in terms of their base stats. That's usually going to be something like boots, something like rings, maybe an amulet. You won't upgrade an amulet for a long time. You can get like an amulet very early on that you can use for almost the entire life cycle of your character till you hit the 4th difficulty level. So you're going to want to keep this, and you're going to want to salvage any gear that you find in the blacksmith, because if you salvage a crappy piece of level 30 gear, it's actually going to give you similar results as if you salvage like a level 90 piece of ancestral gear. So you want to be salvaging stuff. Don't vendor like you might see on some streams. Salvage the gear as you're leveling up. Try to just do events. Try to target focus legendary aspects that will make you have a powerful character that are not in the codex. The next big step to gearing out your character is jumping into World Tier 3. World Tier 3 is accessed when you do the Cathedral of Light boss on World Tier 2. Up until this point, you really only want to play on World Tier 1. But then, when you are approaching 50 or at level 50, I wouldn't recommend lower than 45 if you really know what you're doing, because it can be pretty hard. Characters are not that powerful by level 50 in many cases. You want to down this guy, okay? You want to do the Cathedral of Light on World Tier 2, so you can go to World Tier 3. The moment you get to World Tier 3, your character will suck. It will suck more than you've ever sucked in Diablo 4, okay? It's just going to be an awful character. If you have like a level 45 character in difficulty 3, it is one of the weakest points in the game. But Diablo 4 being what it is with the level scaling mechanic, once you get a few pieces of powerful gear, your character is going to be slamming. The first thing you want to do when you get to World Tier 3 is Helltides. Helltides will give you by far the highest quality usable loot in the shortest amount of time. You want to try to do Helltides like a pro, like I made the video a few days ago. You want to team up with other players that might carry you through some of the content. You want to get a few pieces that are of the higher tier, especially your weapon. We're talking about Sacred. Sacred gear can have a significantly higher item level. I have seen Sacred gear over item level 700, and you can access this even at level 45. It is going to be the biggest jump in character power you will experience in the life cycle of your character for nearly every character. Okay, going from a crappy character at like level 45 or 48 or 50 in World Tier 3, barely killing anything, then you get some of those item upgrades, you're going to feel invincible. And once you get those item upgrades, well, if they're good enough, if their item level approaches 700 as a baseline, it's a really good Sacred piece, especially if you start getting some of those stats. These stats are going to start to matter. Again, especially vulnerable damage, really big one. And for survivability, health and reduced damage from close are really big ones. So those are the kind of stats that you're looking for. But again, honestly, they still don't matter that much. Stats matter at one point in the game, when we hit the highest brackets. The highest bracket of stats is achieved when an item level is 725, or item power is 725. Now this can happen to Sacred gear, but it's usually going to be just ancestral gear that you'll find. There is the rare chance that you'll find a Sacred piece that has an item power of like 701, 702, and if you blacksmith upgrade it to 5 upgrades, each upgrade increases its item power by 5. So you can actually take an item that doesn't by default hit those highest level of stats and make it into a powerful item. Once you start getting well-rolled Sacred items, and especially ones over 700, if you're lucky enough to get them, you can definitely put whatever aspect you want. Okay, and you want to be using some of your Forgotten Souls to re-roll the weakest stat. Gearing up at this point in World Tier 3 and World Tier 4, in the early stages, you want to just look at some rares and look at the legendary items you get to see if they have like 2 stats your character kind of uses. and then you just pick one stat that you think is the worst, and you roll it into a usable stat if you think it's a piece of gear you'll use for a while. Once you are doing Hell Tides, doing some of the content, I don't recommend that you do Nightmare Sigils in difficulty 3 at all. They're not really worth it. But once you get to level like 61, 62, it might take some characters closer to 70. Again, you want to really make a push to enter World Tier 4. In this case, you need to do a different dungeon. It'll be marked on your map. Kill the boss, Elias or whatever. He's kind of hard. He can one-shot some characters, so getting a little bit of life rolls on your gear might be good at that point. And again, when you go from World Tier 3 to World Tier 4, you're going to have a pretty weak character in some cases. But it is going to get so strong so quickly, and you're going in some cases to peak in power very early on. You can actually have characters that are level 60 or even below in World Tier 4. And again, the first time you get into World Tier 4, what do you want to do? Hell Tides. Get the characters that are stronger than you, get the other players to help you gear up by helping you do the events, min-max your Hell Tides. It's super important. Hell Tides, you're going to get lots of ancestral legendaries. They're going to be some of the core items for your character. You are going to want to definitely use legendary powers on every single piece of gear that you find that has 2 good stats, and you've rerolled a decent third at that point, especially if you hit that item level 725 breakpoint. In this stage, in World Tier 4, you're going to get lots of ancestral items. You're going to get lots of ancestral items that are going to drop over item level 725 to begin with, or in some cases you have to upgrade them a little bit to get past that threshold. Items in Diablo 4 account for the mob's level. It has been said that Nightmare Dungeons reward you with higher rates of sacred or ancestral items. While that might be the case, it's not a noticeably higher amount. You are going to pretty much get your first set from Hell Tides almost exclusively, other than a few lucky drops, I would say, because the mobs being your level, if you just get into these difficulties, they're not going to be dropping a lot of sacred when you first get to 3. They're not going to be dropping a lot of ancestral when you first get to 4. But the mysterious chests in Hell Tides seem to be the exception to that. You can have a very underleveled character. You can go to World Tier 4 for the first time, your first Hell Tide, get that mysterious chest, and in some cases you're going to see 4 ancestral legendaries drop from it. It's going to be crazy gear compared to what you're using at the time. In terms of character power at this stage, once you close the gap between where you actually should be in that world tier, like if you're in World Tier 4, once you're nearing level 70, let's say you're 65, 68, and you have a 725 item power in most or every slot with acceptable stats, with a pretty good legendary aspect, that's the time when you want to start hitting up Nightmare Dungeons. Nightmare Dungeons will gear out your character through the glyph system. Now, this is where you'd probably have to go to a different guide and learn the best glyphs for your character, because it always varies on the class and the build that you're using. But you're going to want to level up those glyphs, the ones you're actually able to use before the ones you will use later, and doing Nightmare Dungeons to get that first like little step of power. Getting your glyphs to 15 can be such a big deal. Some characters will be really strong without glyph levels, in which case you can do whatever you want until a little bit later. But some characters will want that power jump, so you want to consider doing Nightmare Sigils maybe a bit more. Nightmare Sigils will give you levels of level ups in your glyphs based on their level. But you typically want to be doing Nightmare Sigils that are 3 levels higher than your characters in terms of the mobs in them, and that's going to be Nightmare Sigil level, your level, minus 51. Trust me on that one. Once you get through this process, once you start getting a lot of the top-end gear, you're going to have a character that's roughly 75 to 80. You're going to notice that levels come in really slow. The first 50 levels, they're fast. 50 to 60 slows down quite a bit. 60 to 70 slows down quite a bit. Everything after 70, it's pretty close to just going to 100, okay? The difference in levels goes up a little bit, but the monsters that you kill, they also just give a little bit more experience as they level up, and they level up as you level up. So you're going to find that a lot of your characters are plateauing in terms of power versus the mobs that you're fighting around level 75 to maybe 80 for most characters, unless you're, waiting for like a unique item to really give you that jump in power or something. And at that point, Diablo 4 is your game to play. Level up as much as you want. It'll definitely be super grindy at this stage in the game, but if you like playing your class and it is a cool build and you're enjoying it, well, what can I say? Just keep doing it, and maybe you'll hit 100 that way. Hope you guys learned something, and we'll see you next time.